Hi folks, this is all the fruit. Today I want to present you a hazelnut, but a very special hazelnut indeed. A hazelnut with a shell so hard, some people say it cannot be cracked, with a taste so peculiar that some people say it's not edible but poisonous. A hazelnut whose timber was traded many centuries ago internationally, in a time when only the most valuable commodities were traded over huge distances. A hazelnut that towers over the biggest oak and the biggest lime tree. Well, meet the tree hazelnut. In this street in Heidelberg, Germany, almost all the trees are tree hazelnuts. And despite 3 years of drought, and the clean German urban services, the street is littered with hazelnuts. I'm sure they are cleaning it at least once a week. And in normal years, sometimes the hazelnuts pile up and the whole street smells of rancid fat. I can smell it a little bit now despite the rain, but sometimes you have like 5 or 10 times the hazelnuts and the cars crush them. Everything looks quite unusual on this hazelnut, all the way to the fruit. But basically the most important thing about this hazelnut, historically, is not the fruit. The fruit or the nuts, they have been used like all hazelnuts for many thousands of years. But other uses were historically, at least officially, more important. I'm sure for the people who collected them for survival, the nuts were the most important. Well, the tree hazelnut, it grows from southeastern Europe all the way to Iran and Afghanistan. Although it has been overused already in the Middle Ages, just like the yew, which was about as valuable as the tree hazelnut. So that now the range has shrunk a lot. We don't even know if there are still trees in Iran or Afghanistan. We don't even know for sure if they ever were. And in southeastern Europe it has been overused so much that nowadays you can mostly only find tiny trees on, oh, look at the pigeon. It eats the cracked hazelnuts, the hazelnuts broken up by the cars. Well, in southeastern Europe it grows mostly on poor rocky soils, where it makes shrubs or tiny crooked trees. But there is still a forest in Romania. It's said it's about 17 hectares and some of the trees are over a meter thick and they are over 300 years old. Well, the tree hazelnut, the timber was known as Turkish hazelnut and was traded up the Danube to Vienna. Why to Vienna? Well, because only the people in the imperial capital were rich enough to buy a lot of it. And it was traded for centuries in blocks, usually up to 65 by 65 centimeters. That's basically blocks 2 feet square. Well, to make a square block out of a tree, and the block is like 2 feet or 65 centimeters, the tree has to be about 1 meter or over 3 feet thick. So those things were gigantic, and since it was traded in big quantities for the valuable Viennese furniture, the forests in the Carpathian and Balkan mountains must have been extensive. Well, then, after a couple of wars with Turkey, somehow the trade died down and the tree kind of got forgotten as a timber tree. This was somewhere about the 17th, 18th century. There was one of the big wars with the Turks, and after that trade basically died down and Austria stopped importing those trees. But fortunately, about 150 years earlier, in the 16th century, they imported a bunch of nuts. And so they started growing them. in parks and gardens. And There are amazing reports about them, like being taller than a man in the second year. Some of them growing after 100 or 200 years to gigantic sizes, like people say bigger than the biggest oak tree, as big as the biggest linden or lime trees. And oaks and limes are among the biggest native trees in Germany. So if a hazelnut is described as bigger than those, yeah, that's amazing. Well, it became quite popular as a street tree in Austria. Then in the beginning of the 20th century in Germany, in southern Germany, which is the closest part to Austria. And then in the second half it spread to northern Germany. Why? Well, because the city climate can be very dry and stressful, and this tree, coming from dry areas from Afghanistan all the way to the Balkans, tolerates those city conditions. So it's a perfect city tree, but except for all the nuts. For some funny reason it got omitted in the most important book on German forestry for decades, and so the forestry people kind of forgot that thousands of pieces of very valuable Viennese furniture were made from this timber. And for some reason the Germans only started planting it in forests about 30 years ago and on a very small scale. I don't know if it's very popular in countries like Romania and Bulgaria. Basically the socialist countries had a very well-developed forestry culture. And also, yeah, there is at least one big forest with good timber trees remaining in the Romanian National Park. So those nations, they knew what they had in this tree. I don't know. I've never seen any. I've never seen it anywhere in Bulgarian like planted forests, and I've never seen it mentioned anywhere. So yeah, very important forestry tree, very important as an ornamental or street tree. But let's not forget the nuts. As I said, this is nothing. I remember years when the street there was like, yeah, it was covered with nuts, not just with those big calyxes, but with those little nuts. And in some countries they are quite popular, but in Germany a lot of people say that they are either too hard to crack, or they are not tasty, or they are outright poisonous. However, I think that this thing has a big future in hazelnut plantations, because usually a hazelnut plantation is quite a cramped thing. Like there is not so much space under the hazelnut shrubs. But this year, forestry people say sometimes they are on mature trees or even on middle-aged trees, there are no branches for the lowest 15 meters or so. So imagine you can have a wonderful timber forest, harvest a gigantic amount of hazelnuts every year for like 100, 200 years, and then if you are not sorry for the nice trees, you can cut them down and get very good timber, kind of like you can do with walnuts. Yeah, I think this thing has a big future, and I hope the Germans introduce some good varieties for forestry, some good varieties which also make good nuts. Because there are a couple issues with those nuts. Because often the biggest nuts have the smallest seed. Not in this case. The nuts are quite big for tree hazelnut, and they have quite big seeds for tree hazelnut. But often teeny tiny nuts, much smaller than those, will have the same size seeds as nuts which are bigger than those. I don't know why. Well, I mean, I know why. It has not been selected for having good seeds in Germany. It has been selected for being a nice park tree. Well, the seeds are usually a little bit elongated and flattish, and they taste quite different from all the other hazelnuts. How shall I describe it? They taste definitely like hazelnuts, but a little bit different from the normal hazelnut species, I know. Those here don't taste so strange. If I had my eyes closed, I wouldn't be 100% sure that this is not Corylus avellana. But a lot of the tree hazelnuts, they taste different. So this quite untypical nuts here. They are biggish, but also with biggish seeds inside the nut, and they taste almost like normal hazelnuts. Yeah, funny. Usually, always when I ate tree hazel, they had a very distinct taste, but those really taste like normal hazelnuts. Amazing. Well, folks, this was the tree hazelnut, a very important timber, ornamental and nut tree. Stay tuned for a lot more fruit videos from the beautiful German cities, and don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe.